Hello and welcome from us, and welcome straight away to my guests for the duration this week. Greg Hands, Conservative MP for Chelsea and Fulham, and Jeremy Corbyn, Labour MP for Islington North. Welcome to you both. A little bit later on, we'll be finding out why most, but not all, London councils are set to freeze their council tax this year, ahead of local elections in the capital. But first, to the propaganda war being waged between tube unions and transport bosses ahead of two planned strikes next month, and the opening of a new front in effect, with TfL claiming it had persuaded 1,000 or so members of staff to act as so-called tube ambassadors, attempting to keep transport moving during the planned 48-hour stoppages. They were volunteer scabs, the RMT union claimed. No, they were just responding to totally unnecessary strikes, said TfL. What do you make of this, Greg Hands?
Well, I strongly agree with TfL. I think these are totally unnecessary strikes. I think the actual package being proposed to reform the tube, to create 24-hour service on key tube lines, and funding that by ending ticket offices, where at the moment, fewer than 3% of tube journeys are carried out using a ticket bought from a ticket office. So why don't we just bring ourselves up to date, get a 24-hour tube like we have like it is had in New York City, and in return end the practice of these tube offices, make sure there's staff there, make sure that the network is safe. So I would actually volunteer to be an ambassador if I had the time to do the training.
Well, hopefully if they're watching, we'll pass on your details or whatever. You know, wait for them to call. Jeremy Corbyn, what's your feeling?
How about the mayor meeting the tube unions? He hasn't met them in 6 years since he was first elected. At no stage has he interacted with those elected to represent the staff of the service that he's responsible for. Secondly, 1,000 jobs being lost. Thirdly, 100,000 people per day use the ticket offices. When I came out of the parliamentary debate on it, I went down to Westminster Station, great long queue of people trying to get to the ticket office, mostly non-English speaking tourists who wanted to find out how to travel and how to get tickets. Finsbury Park Station, my area, totally jam-packed with people wanting him. Heathrow, this is a ludicrous proposal. Why doesn't he get together with the unions and talk about it?
You both talked about the principle that's led to the strikes, or the problem that's led to the strikes, which is about the ticket closures. But what about this strategy this week of claiming that there are going to be these ambassadors drawing on the spirit, the idea from the Olympics, volunteers from other parts of TfL who are going to come into the
People
front
volunteered
line.
for the Olympics because they wanted to support the Olympics. They wanted to be ambassadors for London. They did a fantastic job. Boris Johnson is turning logic on his head by thinking people want to come in to try and break a strike by being volunteers. It's a different issue. Why can't
these are strike breakers, are they? You'd see these as strike breakers.
Why can't they negotiate with the unions instead?
Why not strike breakers?
Strike breakers to stop the strike being effective.
What do you say about that? To break a strike?
These are people who will be trained, and the fact is, the strike is deeply the strike is deeply irresponsible. No, you had your say, Jeremy. Let me have mine. My constituency has got more tube users than any other constituency in the country.
But what about the volunteer principle?
My tube users strongly depend on having that service.
Do you agree with TfL having contacted other staff in TfL and whatever, looking for ambassadors who are going to come in front of house?
I do. I think it's something that should be applauded. And actually, to get the tube working and to stop this irresponsible 4 days of strikes at a time when the London economy is really starting to pick up, in my view, is sabotage of the network, and I strongly applaud TfL's response, robust response.
The closure of the ticket offices, 100,000 people per day already cannot get...
to create a 24-hour tube service, which would be exactly what London needs at this time. My constituents are crying out for these sort of changes.
Service. This is about closure of ticket offices and losses of 1,000 jobs.
No, it's about redeploying the savings.
You know hardly anyone uses it.
I just said the figure, 100,000 per day.
But it's less than 3%.
Jeremy, it is a small proportion, but
I go to Fulham Broadway twice a day.
Go and stand at a ticket office.
I go all the time. I travel twice a day. My constituents are the biggest tube users in the country.
Find out why people use ticket offices: for information, for tickets, for Oyster cards.
But all of those facilities will still be there. There'll still be the staff there to provide the information. There will be.
There's another agenda here by the mayor.
Let's move on rapidly. It's nearly make your mind up time for the capital's councils with London borough elections in May, and it's clear that most authorities are intending to freeze council tax, though not all, as Andrew Cryan reports.
This week, Sunday Politics spoke to all of London's 33 local authorities to ask what their plans were for council tax this year. Only 8 are yet to announce their intention. The rest all want to freeze council tax except Hammersmith and Barnet, who are both going for a cut. According to the government, that's evidence that local authorities are more than capable of dealing with the cuts handed down to them from Whitehall.
Well, it is great to see that we already know the majority, particularly in London, of councils are going to be freezing council tax or indeed cutting it this year. Shows that well-run councils, good councils, can deliver more for less.
Here in Conservative-run Barnet, one of two councils going for a cut, the local authority has made national headlines for its so-called One Barnet programme, sometimes called the largest outsourcing project ever seen in local government. Back office functions like IT and the phone system are now operated by a private company called Capita. On top of that, jobs like repaving the street are done by a private company called Re, half owned by Capita and half by the council. The idea is that that new company would then sell services around the country to whoever wanted to buy them. If money was made, Barnet would then split the profits with Capita. As of yet, though, they haven't found any buyers. But the council's already making money from this site at Millbrook Park. When it's finished, there'll be over 2,000 new homes here, a joint venture between the council and two private companies. Now, if this doesn't look like council housing, that might be because it's not council housing. In fact, it's just private property developed by the council, sold to private buyers, and the aim is to make the local authority money. But elsewhere in the borough, the council's efforts to raise money are accused of causing real distress. This is Janet Leifer. Her husband died last year.
We had probably been together more than 30 years. I suppose we'd been married more than 30 years, and then in his early 60s he developed dementia.
At first, Barnet Council paid for his daycare.
I think the trips to the day centre were very important, both for him and for myself, because it gave him an opportunity to mix with other people. And for me, it was an opportunity for respite, which was and to know that he was safe.
But after the council introduced means testing, Janet had to pay £37 a day.
I probably felt the stress of it more because I was the one who was dealing with the finances and with the bills coming in. So, yes, I found it very, very stressful, very worrying. It was another issue to deal with in what was becoming quite a difficult situation to where you couldn't really manage. It was out of control, really, in a way.
They would have lost something like £20 million because they froze council tax.
An election debate organised by the Barnet Alliance for Public Services earlier this week. The council's cuts to services and to council tax were high on the agenda.
I believe it's simply an election gimmick, and it's going to be a very expensive gimmick for the residents of Barnet because it's unsustainable. You can't cut the council tax and maintain services.
UKIP, however, were not invited.
Oh, be quiet.
They still turned up.
Sir, you would have been welcome to stay if you'd obeyed the rules of the meeting. You have.
But one politician who was invited and declined the opportunity to make a case for his council tax cut was the Conservative leader of the council, Richard Cornelius.
Not there, but he is here. Richard Cornelius, leader of the Conservative Council of Barnet. Welcome to you. A gimmick, it was described as there. I mean, how much is this? You plan to bring the council tax down next year?
We're going to bring it down by 1%.
How much is that, though?
About £1.5 million.
How much is it for everyone, kind of weekly?
It's a small.
How much?
No, it's a small amount. It's £21 for an average council taxpayer in a year.
£21 a year.
It's a
so
small
what's
amount.
That in I mean,
it's a gesture. We've been working hard. We've managed to cut the cost of running the council, and everyone should share in that. And it's right to give the council taxpayer something back.
You accept it's a gesture, really?
It's a gesture, but it shows a direction of travel. It shows our aspiration. That's what we want to do.
And what about when we see Janet Leifer's case there, and seeing that something she was used to getting, and others perhaps like her were used to getting. You introduce that means testing, and then she's paying that a day.
Well, that's very difficult, and I understand how she perceives that. However, it is important that we're fair in what we do with adult social services, that we are even-handed, and that people who can contribute do contribute, and that's what's happened in this case.
Do you think that's proved popular?
I think it has proved popular. I think there's a wide recognition that the welfare system needs radical reform, and it is happening both nationally and locally. It has to be seen to be fair. It's unsustainable if it's unfair.
Of course, in that case, there was also the added complication. He's suffering from dementia, she's taking over these affairs. You're suddenly slapping a kind of £37, £40 daily charge on. I mean, it's a bit of a shock, isn't it?
Well, it wasn't a shock. It was well flagged up, and she was treated very kindly. And, you know, her care is actually... Her husband's care was provided by a charity. It was an outsourced arrangement, and the perception was that, or our perception was, that she could afford to pay, and so she should, whereas there are many unfortunate people who need help more.
Is it, when you talk about a gesture, is it very important to provide a gesture such as this because it is an election year, i.e. is it a gimmick? Do you need to persuade people after uncertainty about your transformation to One Barnet and all this outsourcing that you mean business?
Well, when Eric Pickles told us we had to cut our spending by 33%, that's pretty frightening and frankly unbelievable that we could do it. But we have achieved that.
You don't think that's fair that he did that, really, do you?
Well, with hindsight, of course it was fair because we've been able to do it. I mean, unfortunately, we've proved his case completely, and we've managed to do it, and most other boroughs have done it, so it shows that it could be done. And now we're faced with the situation that it is right to give something back to the taxpayer because we can, to show the gesture, to show that at heart we are a tax-cutting party and a tax-cutting
Jeremy Corbyn, would you agree that across London it just shows what's possible now?
No, it doesn't. What it shows is that Barnet has spent £80 million preparing to outsource all its services to a series of private contractors. It loses democratic control over them. It's damaging for the very poorest and most vulnerable people in the borough. And their housing strategy is all about building houses for sale when there's a desperate housing need for houses for rent across the capital. This is a model of local government which makes EasyJet and Ryanair look comfortable and efficient. This is an awful proposal that's put forward by Barnet, and it is not very popular with a lot of people in Barnet, and I can't understand why you can't go to a public meeting to defend it.
Let him deal with that.
Let me deal with it. It hasn't cost 80 million to do this. We spent 80 million, but that's providing services as well.
80 million preparing to sell it.
That is not true. That is not true. And it's not a sale. It is an outsourcing. It is a contract. We're paying someone to do something that we were, frankly, less able to do efficiently. We've now outsourced the back office function. Well, frankly, that's an obvious thing to do, a no-brainer.
Greg Hands, do you claim that councils, all these councils, are freezing their council tax because they can? It'll have no impact on services. It's fine. The financial climate's not too tough for them.
First of all, I agree with Richard. I mean, I think Barnet Council is doing a very, very good job. The other council that's cutting its council tax this year is my own council.
Fine, but on that point, do you agree? Because there are a lot of them that are going to be freezing the council.
Well, Tim, the point is that you can cut council tax and deliver better services. In Hammersmith and Fulham, council tax is down 20% in the last 7 years since the Conservatives have taken over. In that time, we have produced cleaner streets. We have halved the council's debt.
About the wider principle.
We have just
got a wider principle, not about your own constituency in this instance, because we haven't heard in the film, and we haven't heard from you, we haven't heard from Richard Cornelius here. One of the reasons why most of the boroughs have no choice or are taking this option to freeze is because they've been offered this grant. Some people call it a bribe, this freeze grant, isn't it? I mean, local authorities wouldn't do it otherwise, would they?
I think it's perfectly possible to try and reverse what happened under Labour, where council tax doubled under Labour in those Labour years. We recognise that council tax is something that we need to keep down as a government, and well-run Conservative councils are delivering that.
Just because one council here can do it,
and
there are a number of councils that won't be able to.
The point is, Tim, it's perfectly possible to deliver better services with less tax take, and that is shown by both Barnet, Hammersmith and Fulham, and other Conservative councils. That is the point.
My council has taken a lot of services back in-house because it's cheaper, because we're not paying the profits of the outsourcing companies. Secondly, what's the effect been in Barnet and Hammersmith and others on housing waiting lists, housing needs and adult social care? We all know it's the poorest people who suffer when this strategy is followed.
That's simply not fair, because actually you're looking at what we've done. We've in fact taken our recycling service back in-house.
And are you going to keep it after the election?
We will, yes. We've been very pragmatic about it. We've taken it in, and we aim to run an efficient service, merging a privatised service with our own, and that will work and save money in the next cycle. You know, you say...
That's a mask to all the other privatisation you've done.
Well, No, but you haven't looked at what we've actually done. I mean, yes, we've outsourced some, but there's some 8% of the council's activity. That's all. That's all. You're believing the hype that comes from those people at that meeting.
I mean, those people, they're residents of your borough. You should be more respectful.
The people in May
were occupied and disrupted a council meeting.
Let's go. The people in May will decide when they vote. Of course, Richard Cornelius, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Seems hard to believe, but it's been 5 years since the MP's expenses scandal. Nevertheless, memories were revived this week when a parliamentary committee found that the capital's MPs were struggling to cope with the financial restrictions imposed as a result of the scandal. Max O'Brien has more on this.
In 2009, the UK was rocked by the expenses scandal. In all, over half of MPs were ordered to repay money to the taxpayer. Dodgy dealings included overclaiming for mortgages, having family members on the payroll, and memorably charging the taxpayer for an ornamental duck house. Following the revelations, 23 MPs resigned and 5 have been jailed for their part in the affair. In the wake of the scandal, a new regulatory body, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, known as IPSA, was set up to sort out the mess, introducing independent regulation of MPs' expenses and replacing the old system of self-regulation. Now that same body has launched a consultation on the new expenses system, and this week MPs gave their official feedback which claimed London MPs are being penalised by the new rules. Reasons given included: the capital's constituencies have a particularly high level of casework, London's staffing costs are higher, and there's no provision for hotel bookings in London for London MPs, which particularly affects those with constituencies outside central London. The final decision on the issue rests with IPSA, the new regulator, who are due to publish their conclusions later this year. But with considerable public anger over MP's 11% pay rise scheduled for 2015, any call for increased expenses for London MPs is likely to cause a stir.
Well, Mark Littlewood's here from the think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Let's run down those 3 things. We had sort of cost of living, cost of taking on staff rather, hotel bookings. What do you think about that? Are London MPs shortchanged?
No, this is special pleading, I would say. And I would think that people who commute in to London from many, many miles away. My father commuted in 3-hour return, overall every year return journey. He never complained about it.
The idea of having a kind of overnight in the centre of London to go out to Epping or wherever it might be is really right.
Absolutely extraordinary, the idea that
What about the other things, like staff costs, though, office costs, all those expenses, probably are not taken account of, are they?
Well, there's already some sort of London waiting for MPs, and I think that members of Parliament are actually able to staff their offices remarkably cheaply. I mean, in terms of the labour market there's loads of bright young people who want their first step on the career ladder. I'm sure Jeremy and Greg would be able to confirm.
What you mean,
a researcher, you'll get or people actually very bright people on pretty modest salaries who want to get into
that's all right, you mean, yeah.
Well, I think it's perfectly acceptable. I mean, it's great that people want to get involved in our political life. I don't have a problem with that. The particular bit that I just find shocking is the idea that MPs should be paid differently in London because of the peculiar and difficult issues that London MPs face. Well, what we can't do is to set salaries or allowances based on some social metric of each constituency. And I would have thought that it's probably a lot harder, say, to be a Member of Parliament for Northern Ireland than it is to be a Member of Parliament in North London.
What do you think, Jeremy Corbyn, to that?
Well, I'm not in favour of the hotel thing. It's ridiculous. They don't need hotels. They can commute. Lots of other people commute. But I think there's 2 other issues you need to recognise. One is we're plagued with this idea that we can always reduce wages, reduce costs and bring in unpaid interns, which actually ends up with the children of the wealthy getting on the career ladder because they can afford to work for nothing. I think all interns should be paid a proper wage. And also, I mean, please be aware of this. If you represent an inner London constituency, such as Greg and I do, there is a massive amount of casework. There's massive social tensions. There's massive housing problems. I am inundated with casework all the time. I happily do it. My staff work incredibly hard doing it, and we do the best service we can. But it does cost.
Would you agree with that?
We should be paid for more staff to do it.
Well, I think you can actually make quite a good argument the other way. Say if you're a rural MP in a rural constituency, you could make a reasonable argument and actually you need more staff costs to cover running multiple surgeries, potentially multiple offices in different part of a large, say, Scottish or Welsh or English rural constituency. I think the point here, though, is actually that the staff budget for MPs in just the 8 years I've been a Member of Parliament has actually doubled. The London part of that budget has quadrupled in that time. I personally don't think that London MPs on the staff budget side are hard done by. In fact, perhaps slightly the opposite.
Would you pay anyone any more money here? You pay MPs a bit more money to...
Well, I think how you set MP's salary is fiendishly difficult. I mean, obviously, MPs got in trouble when they were having to vote for it themselves, but now we have this independent authority. But the problem there, of course, is you then get political pressure on MPs to reject the results of an independent authority. I don't know how we could try and make MPs' salaries kind of a bit more performance-related. But in general terms, it strikes me at the moment with the salary for an MP, what is it, £68,000 per annum, somewhere around there, isn't it? That does seem to attract a lot of people to vacancies. I mean, were Greg to step down as the Conservative candidates for Chelsea and Fulham, or Jeremy to step down as the Labour candidate for Islington, there would be hundreds of applicants at this level of salary. It's not as if we seem to struggle to get hundreds of people to
I don't
step
think most people
forward.
go into politics for the money, quite honestly. I'm against the pay rise for MPs, and I hope it doesn't happen, because I think if MPs have happily voted for a pay freeze for the rest of the public sector, they should accept one for themselves.
OK, Mark Wilbur, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Now it's time for the rest of the political news in 60 seconds.
An extra 65 million journeys in London could be made using 3 Crossrail stations annually by 2026, revised figures show. The report looked at Tottenham Court Road, Bond Street and Farringdon stations and found that population growth has outstripped the original estimates. The Supreme Court has rejected a legal bid by objectors to the HS2 high-speed rail link to force further scrutiny of the government's plans. The challenge had focused on whether the government followed the rules when assessing HS2's environmental impact. A group of 9 retired constituents in Croydon South were met by 2 officers and a police car when they tried to deliver a petition to their local MP. Conservative MP Sir Richard Ottaway called for police protection, and only the leader of the group was allowed into the constituency office. A London Assembly report published this week says crime in London has fallen significantly less than in the rest of the country over the past decade. Rates have dropped by 38% nationally, but by just 27% in London.
Greg Hands, how can that be that police performance, relatively to other parts of the country, isn't as good?
Well, come on, Tim. The fact is that crime in London is falling very, very rapidly. In fact, crime in Hammersmith and Fulham, where I represent, and in Kensington, Chelsea, is the lowest it's ever been.
But relative,
actually, at the moment.
Right, but look at it. I mean, it's coming down. But the comparable areas, West Midlands, West Yorkshire, Manchester, they're down 50% in the last decade.
All right, well, in which case, it's great news for the people of Birmingham, great news for the people of Manchester as well. The fact remains, crime is falling in London, is now to record low in my areas, and I think that's incredibly good news for local people.
Well, reported crime is down, there is a population rise going on, and obviously one has to recognise the very good work done by Safer Neighbourhoods teams and local community policing in trying to bring about a safer and more secure society. So I think obviously nobody wants crime to rise, but there are a lot of social reasons why crime is at the level it is in London, and I do think we need to address issues of violent crime. We need to address issues of the numbers of young people that don't have enough to do.
And a final word, 30 seconds remaining, Greg Hands. Not some of the turmoil, perhaps, with afflicting the Metropolitan Police over the last few years affected their effectiveness?
No, I don't think so at all. I think the Met has been very, very effective. I see them in my constituency being effective, and actually today I had a chat with the Met about the record low levels of crime in Hammersmith and Fulham. Very pleased.
Great, to you both. Thanks very much. Andrew, back to you.